you have an interesting theory about experts, that the experts out there aren't, they don't fulfill their promise in terms of the predictions that they return, and that's been the case in several recent events. And I think coronavirus has been pretty much one of these events. And
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of the anti-vaxxers, or the vaccine curious, the vaccine reticent, the vaccine interested but not committed, like I would probably consider myself one of these people, um kind of see that as a or have this reaction as a response to the abject failure of expertise, and not only the abject failure of expertise, but also having it inform any sort of policy. Like, even if we have certain scientific results related to how coronavirus acts, it's not really implemented in policy. So I know you have a lot of thoughts on this. You've written on this, but how do you do you have empathy for people like me who are not necessarily jumping on the vaccine bandwagon?
Well,
I'm not an anti-vaxxer. I think it's a great measure if you're in a risk category. I think I would take it if I was
yeah.
older.
Yeah, it's not a crazy. I don't think it's a crazy decision at your age and health, assuming you're healthy. It's not crazy. We are in a place where a lot of old fat people in America are not taking the vaccine, and that's why we have ridiculously high death rates that happen to be concentrated in Republican areas and Republican counties. And it's just a shame that the liberals are the only ones who care about these red staters killing themselves. It's really a failure of the conservative movement. But on the issue of expertise more generally, yeah, I mean, there's somebody gets a degree, they become a professor, or they become some kind of government bureaucrat, and what how do they get that position? Do they necessarily know more than you, or know more than any other intelligent person? And there's no proof of that. An inventor who comes up with some kind of machine, or comes up with some kind of gadget, or somebody who makes a lot of money in a market, they've proven something. They've gone out in the real world and done something. Well, you become a professor, what, peer review, other people looking at your work and saying this is good work, and they got their position because they also passed some peer review and people said that that's a good work. That's a self-licking ice cream cone. So what Phil Tutlock, the great psychologist, did was he went out and he got a bunch of experts, and he mostly on geopolitical matters, and he said, forecast, like what's the GDP growth going to be of whatever country, what's the likelihood of war, what does this give me, numbers, give me percentages, so we can track it. And then he took some other people who were not experts in the field, but maybe smart people who were in other fields, and the experts who were predicting things in their own field didn't do any better. So what does that tell you? The whole concept of expertise is sort of fake. Now, it- people can take that and they could say, well, I can't believe anything anyone says. And it is a problem, because just because someone is an expert doesn't mean they know anything. And so, I mean, if people are just people are sort of confused about what to do, I mean, I would suggest finding people who, because there are super forecasters, there are people who consistently predict things well, and they tend to have certain traits in common. They tend to be people who think they tend to be people who are not very partisan in their thinking. They're not very attached to the Democrats being right or the Republicans being right. They're people who think in statistical terms. They don't ignore base rates. If the GDP growth has been 3% for the last 20 years, you don't predict it's going to be 20% or minus 20% the next year. That's probably not a good prediction. And people often get attention for making these crazy predictions about wide variation of norms, like there's going to be a civil war or there's going to be a collapse of China. You hear these things all the time. They're not very likely, because such things don't happen very often. So I would suggest following people like that. But you can't just say, what you can't do is just say, I don't trust the experts at all, because look, you still trust the experts. You still get on the plane. You still wash your hands after you go to the bathroom. I mean, they lied to me about so many things. Well, they also told you that the polio vaccine works, and the establishment also told you that the measles, measles, mumps, and rubella, and that stuff worked too. So sometimes they were
Yeah.
right. And so just saying we're not going to trust them, that doesn't really work either.
Yeah, I think the fear here is that there's been a marked decline in the trustworthiness of experts recently, or at least that's the perception, for different reasons. I feel like, especially in America, where essentially all the expertise comes from, there's so much polarization, there's so much partisanship, that these are like two poles that pull the narrative towards them, and they also pull the experts because they have kind of a power gravity around them as well. So,
Mhm.
the source is tainted at least it feels to me, and that's the source where all the expertise, trickles down, even to backwater places like Romania, where I am. So that's at least to me, that's why. I don't mistrust expertise on principle, but it feels like this is a time where there is an extra reason to be stroking your chin a little bit more when someone makes a big pronouncement.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. I feel like the track records of vaccines and human history are very, very good. It's not like there's some like anti-racist angle to vaccines. So it's not like when they tell you BLM, protests are okay, but other kind of protests are not okay. You could see why that's nonsense. Yes, but generally you're right. It's very concerning. It's sort of like in the communist world, which the ex-communist world, which you live in, where everything had to be socialist something, right? You had socialist literature and socialist architecture and socialist whatever genetics was shaped by Lysenkoism and all this other things in the Soviet Union. And you have that same thing today. I think in the last 5-10 years, particularly in the US, everything is about wokeness, identity politics, racism. People give it different terms, but concern with racism, sexism, it's become everything. It's become epidemiology, it's become anthropology, it's become anything you could think of has this feminism and this race component. And yeah, it's very disturbing. It's sort of it's a sort of it's totalizing. I mean, it's just completely imbues imbues everything that it touches. I mean, I remember the night growing up in the 1990s in the US. I mean, the late night comics like weren't known for being political. They were known for being sort of center of the road, and Republicans and Democrats could both laugh at their jokes, and even the audience was fine with that. Like the audience wouldn't like aggressively attack them if they weren't left wing enough. And it's just crazy where we've gotten, where everything's been politicized in this very strange direction.